the expectation in these rooms too. You may wonder how is collaboration is life, what it's all about. Okay, let me take a quick look. So I can't wait to introduce to you our first speaker, but let me tell you that he is the co-owner and the director of LatStudios from Australia. He is also a registered landscape architect and fellow of the Australian Institute of Landscape Architects. Ladies and gentlemen, it is the time that I present to you Mr. Damian Thompson.
Thanks very much for that lovely introduction. I'm here to talk about collaboration in the context of landscape architecture and my practice in Australia. So huge thanks initially to the organising committee for putting this all together. The concept of collaboration is a massive thing for creators of all types, and I deeply appreciate all the effort that's gone into running this and getting this set up, particularly the invitation to come and speak. So I'll be running through a few things today. We've got a little time together. The guys that are in the wings over there, you know, if you'd like to actually come into the middle and sit more centrally, that's cool. We'll try and make this as relaxed and interactive as possible. But if you're comfortable over there, that's good. I'll just reach out to you. So this is me. Today, I'll be talking about the different scales of collaboration and how that affects practice for us as a landscape architect, noting that it is the last day of International Landscape Architecture Month, the 30th. So excellent timing and a great chance to discuss what everything, all aspects of landscape architecture can actually bring to the other design professions. I've got here a talk in 5 parts, but actually there's a couple of other things thrown in. Given we're collaborating, I thought you'd like to know a bit about me and my professional and personal journey to become a landscape architect. And there's also some, what I'm calling influencers, people that have actually had a really big impact on my professional arc through the last couple of decades. Those 5 layers through which I'll be describing different projects include systems thinking. So this is the kind of, before you even start a project, where is your head at in terms of your engagement with the universe and the planet, through to catchments, and the scale gets right down to corridors, precincts and parklands or places. So starting with me. So this is my country, right? So this is southeast Queensland. I grew up on the bay. Spent a lot of time in small tinny boats chasing mud crabs and fish in these kind of waterways. This is a photo taken on the way to come here a couple of days ago. So all of those interstitial spaces and waterways, I was really very lucky to have that as my backyard as a kid. We'd often go fishing in glorious places like this. You can imagine the deep impression on a small person when you are in this environment all the time, the kind of places that a lot of people go to travel to for holidays. But this was my reality. And then my parents did a really silly thing. They moved to the city, and the city in Brisbane is nothing like Bangkok, obviously, smaller place. But my small mind was completely torn apart by the idea that instead of going down to the tidal mud flats and chasing mud crabs in the mornings, hoping not to get your fingers and toes cut off, this was my reality. So me and my mates, we used to run around these waterways in our BMX bikes. This is, I'm going to say, the 80s, trying not to get too many bad rashes from the various industrial pollutants that were kind of being emptied into the creek. And this is a universal problem. So this isn't just not a problem for Brisbane or Sydney or Tokyo or Bangkok. This situation, our lack of respect for nature and the way we engage with cities and nature has to change. And so that really has formed the kind of lifeblood of my practice. Yeah, it turned out so is this. So my mother said to me, "Why the frown?" You're very nice people here, so there's no expletives, but yeah, why the long face? And I said, well, I've got to do something about this. And like my good friend, I always drew my whole life. So I was lucky that I had a creative output to deal with this conundrum. I started doing some research at school. And what my small young mind thought was an urgent initial problem that was just happening then actually seemed to actually be a bigger problem So the colonial footprint and imprint around the world has resulted in landscapes like this being degraded. This is a photo taken in a creek near my house in southeast Queensland about 100 years ago. And that really shook me, actually, because the idea that as a species, we've kind of forgotten how to listen to country and listen to place and understand how it actually moves and shapes the quality of our life. So this issue was a real moment in time when I'd gone to the library and done the research and the penny dropped. What do I do about it? So you start looking for bright lights on the horizon. You look for people who can teach you things. And you look for role models where they weren't possibly existing in your immediate life. So I'm going to introduce the layers of catchment thinking through a number of, what some of you might call influences. Not all influences are out for your best intentions. Some of them can do your head in. This guy, Arnie, this film, and I'm going to read this is literally the movie poster that you got on the screen here. I won't put an Arnie voice on because that'd just be too much. But in the years of darkness, 2029, the rulers of this planet devised the ultimate plan. They would reshape the future by changing the past. And I remember going to the cinema and thinking, well, that's a crock because no one can go back in time and change anything. We've got to deal with the issues today. But that was 1984, and that was the headspace of these people. So one of the first lessons I got from Big Arnie was to know your enemy, right? Understand where they come from, understand the politics behind all of that and why they're giving you these messages of this dystopian future. I had a good talk once where someone said, like Blade Runner, films like that in the 80s and 90s are just an exercise in a lack of imagination. So dystopian future films, while we all get into them and they're fantastic and we love the computer-generated trickery and so on, they're actually taking us down a path of negativity where I think we should actually be moving towards a path of positivity and research because there's some amazing R&D out there that can help us with this current conundrum. Right, so that's me. I'm down there in the culvert and everyone around the world understands these spaces. They're in every city, So I've ditched the skateboard and I've stolen a motorbike and I'm quietly packing myself, which is a nice way of saying it, because right behind me is this thing. I've understood already that the world that my parents and their parents and generations before grew up in, which was reasonably stable, and yeah, there might have been some shifts and such. And as you know, from the 70s here in Bangkok, the last 50 years have seen an unprecedented level of change in the city and also changes in natural systems and how we've just talked before about the length of your monsoon season getting longer and longer and longer, the impact of that. How do you sustain arable life and growth to bring amazing food and produce to the table if the seasons are changing? You can't get to that produce when you usually would have. So this freaked me out. And understand your enemy. I had no idea what landscape architecture was. I'm happy to put my hand on my heart today, and it is, the last day of World International Landscape Architecture Month. And I wanted to be an architect because I saw that as the way to change the way we inhabit our planet. Then I found industrial design, and ironically, I was thinking last night at dinner, I meant to mention it, at QUT, so shout out to my old university in Brisbane, the first year and a half of study when I went through included architecture, town planning, urban design, landscape architecture, interior design, all the things that you guys have brought together here to the table, which is so epic to see that collaboration and connectivity between professions happening. I can't tell you how important it is because none of us here are smart enough to get it sorted ourselves. We have to lean on each other and learn from the past. And one of my other mentors I'll speak to in a second talks to this. So, Bulletigate, I just wanted to fix stuff, I wanted to stop being in the culvert, going down the drain, and find a way. So landscape architecture was absolutely that way to connect art and science together for the betterment of future generations. This is a photo of another local creek in Brizzy, and I've got it in here just to demonstrate that obviously things are still getting crazy. If we continue to grow within and on top of natural systems, this thing is happening all around the world. The conundrum we know, it's critical. It's called a climate emergency for a good reason. We have to act quickly, and it doesn't just involve the smart, creative brains in this room and elsewhere, it also involves politics, right? So you have to get political with this stuff, otherwise things won't happen. And certainly part of starting a practice was about making positive change in my lifetime. You know, I need to see some things happening. Notions of balance are also critical. So a big part of our practice is understanding the mental health implications of degraded landscapes and environments. And I think COVID has been an amazing teacher and collaborator for us all in the last few years. We've really had to understand exactly why we need to collaborate to get ourselves out of this massive mess that we've found ourselves in. So can we do it? Yeah, of course we can. So the answer for that for me was, and some friends, clearly the first thing you think of when you see the global financial crisis coming is you think, well, I should start a design practice. That's a really good thing to do. And that's exactly what we did. But out of the ashes of that financial calamity rose LatStudios. It began as Lat'27. And the idea behind the name of the studio and the practice was the latitude of Brisbane is -27. It's a very bad PR and marketing idea to put a negative in anything at a business name, so of course we ditched that. So Lat'27 was where we started, because when you look at the latitudes of the planet, there's some commonalities, particularly with Gondwana and the way that it's separated between how humans interact with natural systems on those latitudes. Longitudes are a different story. So the other part of it was that we had a whole lot of people that joined LatStudios, Lat'27 back then, from different parts of the world. So we've got people in this room that have moved around the planet and enjoy different environments and different landscapes, and people that have chosen to move their whole lives to other parts of the planet for various reasons, and lots of them being related to the place they're in. So, as a practice, another really fun thing to starting a design studio, perhaps for people that are at the beginnings of their career, is that you get to actually challenge and define exactly what the hell you stand for. Like, what is it about your mind, your community, your family, your collaborators, that sure, you can talk about it at the cafe, rabbit on about it, but actually putting that down on paper and creating an ethos that you can live by is a critical moment. So for us, contextual design is at the heart of connecting ourselves, our own baggage and our own histories with place and context, and also community, the larger thing. So I'll talk about collaboration techniques later, but really there are a lot of people that aren't in these rooms and aren't at public consultation forums and online that don't have a voice. And if you add on to that a whole lot of species that don't get a voice in these conversations about how we make cities, that's an issue. So we set out to be intentionally multidisciplinary. We were told by a marketing firm recently that is the worst term to describe a design practice, but I actually think it's pretty good. It takes away the professional boundaries that you see on this page and combines them together into a creative conversation around how we can sort things out. The other one is creativity at all scales. So I mentioned at the start of the chat, those 5 scales of collaboration in the practices, a whole range of things, and I'll run through 5 projects today that describe that. And this is something that we've been saying a lot in the practice since COVID. And Jakob and I were having the same chat. We all want to be in the studio together, and Mungwan. You know, this idea of a practice online, at home, we believe in our practice that that's actually pretty bad for the soul. You know, being stuck in your own thoughts for too long can get a little out of control, hence the mental health issue. These are some of the amazing characters that I feel very blessed actually to be working with on a regular basis, both in Brisbane and Melbourne and all over Australia and other places. Each of these people have their own stories and sort of professional arc and trajectory, but they've all chosen those particular cities because of something about that latitude and that place. It was also World Earth Day recently, just a few weeks ago. And I'm always, I like this image a lot in its simplicity. We just have one of these things. And I know Jakob's going to talk about a really nice example later today that I hope you all come and watch, about how we can, through individual agency and action, get to help this thing still do its thing. It's pretty broken and busted at the moment, but we have to understand it from a high level first, collectively and collaboratively, otherwise we're not going to get anywhere. So the first chapter of, I did lie to you, I said 5, but there's probably 7 or so. The first of the big ones, systems thinking. this guy here, does anyone know a chap called Bruce Mao? Anyone heard of Bruce? I was lucky enough to have lunch with this guy, and it was as fun as that image suggests. It went for hours. We talked about everything. He came at the design of cities through, I think, a business and marketing lens to develop this thing called the Bruce Mao's Incomplete Manifesto for Growth. And I want you all to Google that now if you want. There's a list of stacks of tips. I have ripped off several of them for a lecture I once did on creative constipation, which is about how to just get things moving when you've got a conundrum that you can't unpick. It's a terrific fact checker for all the questions and doubts you might have in your own mind about how to tackle life. He says a lot of things. One of them is, this one's good, forget about good, go for great. The other thing behind this idea about forgetting about what's good, so you guys, I'm assuming everyone's come from a design school background and you've been trained in the creative process, trying to work out what good is and not revering your mistakes is a really big problem in the creative dark arts. So you need to embrace your mistakes, all the dead ends and alleys that no one talks about. You get to the presentation at the end and you've got the solution, but actually all the growing and learning and developing as a human and as a team happens through all those dead ends. So I'm famous in the studio for not throwing out those sketches. I love them. You kind of point to them and go, because quite often you'll loop back. You'll get a client who'll call you on the weekend and he'll go, I want another option for something. And you'll go, well, actually, yeah, here it is. Scan it, send it. We tried that, wasn't working. It's really good when you're on the hop in a collaborative sense in public consultation. If you can describe all the things you've tried and that haven't come off and have the reasons why they didn't kind of end up on the final master plan, that is super powerful information. Forget about good. The other one that he talks about is don't do design competitions. Controversial. Because a lot of young practices particularly, that's how you get your start in life. Get your name out there. The institutes often, and I'm not sure about you guys, I'm backing away from you, encourage competitions as a way to generate discussion about your professions and the benefits, but competitions can also rip a whole lot of energy out of a practice for not a lot of potential. So again, think twice about competitions is my personal thing. So Bruce Mao is around 65 now, and he's probably at a time when some of us would be thinking about a beach house and walks in the mountains and retiring, but he's set up a new company. I'm really inspired by people that professionally are continually changing the game. Okay, the world's changing. I'm going to set up a new thing called the Massive Change Network because I need to leverage my thinking at a scale that's actually going to influence continental changes and not just city and site-based changes. So I've clipped his website here. He's not paying me for this. It's not an advertisement. This is just a genuine thinker and a guy that I admire. So how does that translate to where we live? Okay. Having that conversation, that long lunch, actually led to an idea that forget about waiting for the tenders to come out to do a project. Actually, what we need to do is invent a project ourselves. Now, Brisbane, where I live, has this reputation for being an amazing subtropical exemplar. Chatting with the guys from Singapore last night, the whole world seems to point to that city as a great example of biophilic cities and how they can actually, be threaded through major urban centres. We certainly have aspirations to do that, and a lot of our work is about trying to reduce the heat island effect. But we didn't have a mechanism, there was no book, no guideline in our city. So again, politics, governance, the playbook didn't exist. So we really, with a bunch of other creatives, worked on this thing called the Green Grid. And what we quickly discovered, this is the inner city of Brisbane, so that's about 10 kilometres by 5 kilometres. We have the Olympics coming up in Brisbane in 2032. So you're all invited to come. You can't all stay at my place, but there's a great example of a political shift, a global political shift that bounces around, and a lot of people, and you probably had the same conversation, why would we go for the Olympics? It's a big burden on the city. In our case, it's actually a chance for, we'd be a third or second tier city globally to get some of these systems happening, to get some political will and some money, to get some projects happening that will have benefits for future generations, not just for the party of the games. So this project is timely. This slide is called Perception versus Disconnection. And if I go back to the first slide, this guy here, a lot of people think of Brisbane as this kind of image. This is a great retail centre. The reality is, when you go forward to the maps, that there are big chunks of green, but they're totally disconnected. And so if you want to encourage, so we've got a health crisis with a sedentary lifestyle. We sit down. Everyone's sitting down at the moment. We sit at our desks. We sit in our cars. We actually need to move. Our bodies are designed to move. But if the connective tissue in our cities between these green hearts, the green lungs, like you've got here, are so rubbish for pedestrians and cyclists and kids, it's kind of useless. It only really benefits the people that live around those places. So again, it's political. This guy is another layer which a lot of cities have. Like you guys, we've had massive floods recently, and it's totally shaped the way we think about our coexistence with the waterway. But nobody really has this map on their desktop at home like I do, which is, these are the flooding extents of the waterways inside Brisbane. So not a huge city, but if you look at the pressure of urban development around the city core, so I have a pointer which I can use. The CBD is here, adding one more fat red dot to the plan. And we have some connections over the river, a couple of freeways, but the pressure on places like this is West End, New Farm, the Valley. You can just see all these old ancient waterways that we've covered up, and there are so many of them here and every other major city. The conflict between population drive and growth is crazy. I'm running through some systems thinking diagrams here, right? So really getting to grips with the topography of your place is critical, particularly for the cities that we work in. And here we've got this lovely big floodplain around the river, this amazing flat landscape. And so micro-grading in this city of Bangkok is super critical. You can see where there's subsidence and how that doesn't impact on pedestrian life and walkability. We also did, and you can apply this approach to anywhere, and it's not certainly the first time this kind of thinking's been done, but this is a 400-metre walkable catchment from local parks. So everything you see on this slide in pink is a place that is underutilised, and you'll see some of the green blocks that are on the plan. These are open spaces. Like this is a cracker, and this is actually a park up on the hill above the CBD of Brisbane called Victoria Park, and I'll finish the presentation on this place. It's a golf course. So what we saw internationally with open space and communities in COVID, what our collaborator COVID did for us was tear down some fences. If you think of all the French Revolution was about tearing down fences because the monarchy had all of the parks in Paris. And the British were so worried about that, they opened the doors to Regent's Park and all the Hyde Park, and those parks were hunting grounds. So tearing down fences, and there's another project example, remind me if I don't get to it later, where connections and fences are so critical to be removed, so you don't have single-use activities in big chunks of green space. We've all got a turf club or a racetrack in our cities. And I can tell you that just by looking at the scale, size and maintenance of the fences around those facilities, how well guarded they are by certain parts of the community. If you lay into that, the parks I spoke of and the potential, we also get a lot of, it's not rocket surgery, but there's a lot of open space along creek lines, which is not really useful a lot of time of the year. And this map just shows you again, at a macro level, 800 metres away from every walkable park connection, there are still massive chunks of the inner city which are under pressure for basic things. Put them together, still big issues of a combined deficit. And we've got a river there as well, blocking access. So you've got to remember, this was a study that had a small seed funding application attached to it. All of this work was basically donated time by LatStudios over the top of that. The other thing is the changing climate that we've got. how can we build a river city resilient to rising water levels and greater incidences of major storm events? How do we manage that? Is a big issue. So out of that, some key ideas. We need to, and this is an issue here, we need to really re-embrace the river and make it a democratic public space. How can you get along the edges of a city without getting access to it? We need more bridge connections to connect communities up to those open space systems that exist, and more links. This idea of a shadeway is a one that's been picked up and adopted. I did a talk just recently about the run to the 2032 Olympics and a walkable city. And this is a very simple idea. If you pick the key routes that connect, as we've done here in this example, major public spaces, hospitals, high streets, shopping centres, university campuses, and other nodes, as Mongwon was telling me, you've got a node city here, and on a smaller scale. If they're all connected, and the connections are super green subtropical boulevards, all of a sudden you're going to get people moving around happily in those corridors. And then another idea of actually making our landscape more productive. This is particularly an issue in Australia where a lot of the production is happening way out, where there's a lot of small community gardens for urban agriculture to thrive. These things, these city farms, we call them, are actually they're community hubs. It's actually more about the wellness of the community and connections and resilience than it is food that gets grown out of them. And there you have it, the green grid. So, like I said, this approach has been tested in places like Sydney and Melbourne. It could be applied anywhere, and it's been a magnificent tool for focusing political minds to action in critical corridors and places. So it becomes a bit of a hit list. That wasn't enough, though. We weren't satisfied with a diagram. We actually needed to have projects, because that's how we live and breathe. And under these themes, Cool City, Green City, and Healthy City, we devised a number of pilot projects to actually make good on the big picture thinking. I won't go through them all in detail, but you get the flavour of it. Each of these things is tuned more into where this particular city is at, and if this was applied elsewhere, the big ideas would be similar, but the specifics of each place would change. So a cool city is not just about sunglasses and great nightclubs and bars and so on. It's a temperature issue. The heat island effect is a massive problem globally, and there's some very simple ways we can deal with that, which goes to the next one, the green city idea, urban forestry, big chunky forests, and complexity. So biodiversity is a critical thing, and then healthy, getting in and amongst all of that. I think in the end of the day, I tell my kids, we're just animals. In the end of the day, we're instinctive beings. We need a connection with nature. And in Japan, if you're not feeling well, you can have a dose of forest bathing. You guys would have heard that term before. They've discovered over there that, and this was in the 80s, that a critical connection between our minds, hearts, and place is essential for a happy, long, and fruitful life. Another one, river focus, getting down to the details. In this instance, it's crazy to think that the city didn't really have a strategy that dealt with all of the things that were happening on the river's edge, given it, all of the marketing material for Brisbane is called the River City. So in this instance, we defined a way to actually tackle that and get our brains around it and make it into projects. And I'm happy to say a number of these things have turned into new bridges and such that we're working on. And then river life. This is an aspect of master planning that doesn't actually get talked about enough, I think. It's the social engagement with place that people remember. Like, where would you take... Good test is, if you were bringing an international visitor to this city, where would you take them? And is that somewhere that you go all the time? So the great places are the ones where locals and visitors interact happily, and that's been our kind of mantra at LatStudios for a while now. This diagram starts to map that out. How can we make the most of all of the energy that exists in these places and make it coalesce into a more cogent experience? Super interesting idea. And it goes to where a lot of creatives start to unpack. It goes to the marketing and management and maintenance of place. we're not always the best at that. So how do you get projects to encourage economic and social behaviour in place? This is an idea, it's some easy wins. What I really like about this slide, so like you guys, not as impressive as your overhead circulation system. We have a number of bridges and freeways in Brizzy. And conveniently on this provocative slide, we've taken all the cars off the freeway. They're gone. So there's none in the model, therefore there's no traffic problems. But we've got a bus bridge that connects two sides of the river, the cultural precinct and the commercial precinct. We just suggested that if we had a couple of students stand on both sides of the bridge with a bucket and 100 umbrellas, because this bridge is designed to not carry any more load. The engineers were freaking out. They said the city will self-combust. If we put one little arbour, some vegetation, or an awning on the bridge, I'm not sure if your PR insurance can cover this. Thompson, go away. So we came back with this one, lightweight, super easy. Some students hand out some umbrellas to some unsuspecting citizens of the city, and they get to walk over this 150 metre long bridge in shade, and then they just put it back in a bucket at the other end. We're yet to get a sponsor for this, so I'm here today. I implore you, it'd be great to get some backing for it, but maybe I'll have a chat to BlueScope. But this is the kind of thinking that I think as creative collectives we need to focus on. It doesn't always need to be the mega pavilion or the amazing cultural centre. Little points in time can be really powerful. Resilient city, what the hell is that? Any ideas from the floor? What makes a resilient city? Got some dot points for us. You saw on the diagrams how threaded together Brisbane is with waterways, as it is with Bangkok. We do have more room here than this city to do some of these things, but it was about advancing the science of waterway systems and how critical they are to the healthy well-being of the city and its residents. So reinstating, obviously, these things are very simple. What was there before? What can cope with the change in climate change? And I'll run through an example in a second of natural systems to better deal with the flow and holding water back. Everyone's heard of this idea of the sponge city, which has gained a lot of traction over the last 10 or so years, where the best thing you can do for water in an urban catchment is to hold it up as high as you can in that catchment for as long as possible, if you have the room. And whole of system thinking is critical there with all of the items that are mentioned. We do know that greater complexity of anything is more fun to begin with, but is actually way more resilient. So the days of having monoculture trees down avenues and the days of having the single species plantings and the days of having really simple layouts is going. Because we know that particularly in urban settings where you've got much bigger temperature gradient change, a more resilient landscape, more complex multi-species approach is way better, not just for management and maintenance, but also so other species can thrive. And again, we're just part of a system. We need to think like that and create these little vignette images to try and convince the political systems to change their minds. So increasing ecological diversity. The scale of species. We discovered that if you plant one big tree, like a fig, there's a few in Brizzy, you get something like 70% more ecological and social benefits out of that action than you do from planting 10 smaller species that might fit under the power lines and they might fit in that little crack in the paving. Go big or go home has been the feedback for us, and that's an international study, and I'm happy to share some of this stuff with people afterwards if you want to have a look. Obviously, take care of what you've got there already, build on that, understand it, get an arborist to look at it, and manage it actively. And this is back to the buckets of money. So the budget for managing public landscape is critical to address because it doesn't always make it onto the spreadsheets that we work on our projects. Then the last dot point's an interesting one. It's an easy thing to say that, well, it might fall down this tree. So there's a hearts and minds conversation here that creatives are super important in the conversation. How do we tell the story of this fragile landscape we all inhabit in a way that's going to help people feel more relaxed to be in it? We do have several species in Australia that will kill you. Some famous ones. So there's a bit of management around that. We have to be sensible. The snakes in South East Queensland are particularly venomous. but engaging with nature always comes out on top in the end. And investing in the future. This is one that I've been thinking about, this quote from McPherson from a long time ago, about the benefit of a very modest increase in the percentage of your urban forest canopy can get you a couple of degrees dropped in an urban temperature sense. I know that's a really pressing issue for this city and many others. A concentrated effort to actually get large trees in urban areas. Think of it in the same way that we think about the money we pour into hard infrastructure, rail corridors, overhead walkways. Think of it in that context. In this situation, this is living green infrastructure, which is just as important as anything else that the engineering budgets have to deal with in terms of drainage. So many more benefits can come from this strategy. Why stop at 20%? And then we did have a lot of residual places around the city that just were remnant left over, and I see them around the city as well, fenced off sites that may be the base of a bridge abutment, or it may be the undercroft of a freeway, which is no-go for the citizens of the city, and that irks me incredibly. We're all supporting the governance structures that manage places. We shouldn't have them fenced off from us. So we made a map of all the places that were state government owned and council owned that could then become productive landscapes. It's a bit of a no-brainer, really. You guys are way more connected to, well, certainly the crew I was with last night, to the joys of food and cooking than we are in South East Queensland. We've got a ways to come, and we learn a lot from you, actually, about how to do this better. And then I put this in because one thing that's often forgotten in these conversations of 2D graphics and people speaking into microphones is the full sensory experience. So each city has got its own smell and flavour. The sounds of a city are just as important as the sights. And that means that if we can think about a sensory experience in cities, which includes obviously eating, it makes your city more accessible. So you're getting more community members that can thrive and engage with place if we're also designing with that in mind. So seasonality, when are the big flowering systems in play? When are the mangoes on? When are the markets happening? This notion of a sensory way of thinking as a creative is critical to how cities can become vibrant places to live in and love places. And then this is the bit that's quite hard, and I guess today's part of it is understanding how your creative energy has agency in a broader public conversation. So I know so many designers that are just cringing at the idea of getting on television or writing that article or being interviewed. I don't know, is that the same here? You know, people generally are kind of reluctant to put their hand up. This is something that our design schools, maybe on Monday, when you were there at the uni, you can talk about this because we need to have our designers and creatives ready to step forward into this leadership gap that exists, I think, about how we make great places. This is just a snapshot article where our bit of work on the right of the screen there was put next to some other work on the river. I believe that's a WOHA building from that amazing practice on the left there on the edge of the city. So biophilic landscape, I'd live there. That looks amazing. Next to this idea of big open space systems thinking. All right, chapter 2, catchments. How are we all going? Coffee's flowing? Everyone's all right? Pulse check. If you're wondering about the bits of paper on the tables, we had an idea. I went to a gig a couple of years ago, Ben Folds. Ben Folds 5, he's an amazing musician, and when he does his encore set, he plays piano like a virtuoso. It's amazing, but he's sort of indie rock sort of player. He gets people in the audience to throw up a paper aeroplane of a song that they'd like to be covered, or played as the encore, and it's the most amazing visual spectacle at the end. All of these paper, and I didn't know what was going on. I thought there was he'd been attacked or something. There's just paper going everywhere. First time I'd seen it. And the piano's covered in paper aeroplanes, and he just picks one up and goes, oh yeah, sure. Something by the Beatles? Sure, and just bangs that out. So you need to be a virtuoso, obviously, for this to work in a musical sense. But if you would like to write something down on that bit of paper as a question, even just to sort of get your arms moving and get your brain moving, No one here is going to bite anyone's head off, so if you have a question for Q&A, it's coming up in a little while. You can do that, and you might choose to make a paper aeroplane if you've got the chops to do that. And we will attempt to see how that goes, but I might have to get some protective eyewear if it works well. So, how did I get to that? So, catchments. Chapter 2. Ah. Does anyone know who this is? Keith Richards. I do like the Rolling Stones, and I kind of like this guy. And this is an example of someone who's just charging through life. I did a Pecha Kucha once where we talked about this guy. It's really important that we all collaborate and get together to leave the world, when we're gone, in a better place so that Keith Richards can enjoy it, because he'll be the only one still alive, because I don't think he's ever going to die, given what he's done to himself over the years. But Keith just popped in there as a bit of a distraction, really. You shouldn't be there, Keith. You should go now. I can't look at that face too much longer. But catchment planning, for me, is a bit like... I was trying to draw an analogy between the scales of our practice and families, because that's a really nice way to think about how we engage. Catchment thinking, which is the outer perimeter of a water catchment, so the ridge line down to the waterway, for me is like a big crazy family. Keith, just go. Okay, go. Thank you. Get out of here. I'll go back to the other. This is the actual guy, the serious guy. So catchments are critical. Like a big, crazy family gathering. This is actually my third influencer, Abraham Maslow. You guys would have heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. There they are there. We all sit somewhere in that triangle on the right. And catchments are really like a big, happy family gathering, right? It's not crazy. Well, you define happiness in whichever way it works for you. I come from a very large family, so crazy is good fun. Sanuk? Fun. And this guy here was a very foundational moment in my thinking about how we could deal with complexity in the public world. Where do you sit? And when you start to begin looking at people that are looking on the larger portion of basic needs and safety, and that includes pedestrian safety on streets when you're walking around on them. This notion of democratic life in public space is super critical. Have we got that right? Before we get to the incredible artwork on the hill, have we actually helped people enjoy life at a very basic and fundamental level from a livability perspective, but also a safety perspective? And by safety, one of the critical metrics coming out now is that women's safety in public space internationally is what we should be focusing on, because if we can get that right, I've got 3 daughters. That's the litmus test, I think. If people are happy to stay out late at night and not carry keys in their hands to get back to their car, nurses working late, getting to car parks, then we're winning. But at the moment, we haven't got that level. So let's not kid ourselves that in the design of great places where it's all about the showy magazine covers, we've got to do the hard work to get these basic things sorted before you get to the lofty heights of self-actualization. You may be there. One big happy family. All right, so catchments. This is project number 2, and we've got, how are we going for time, everyone? Everyone's good? This is Norman Creek from the air. It's a fact that any waterway, if it gets disturbed, if it's, say, an untouched waterway in the forest, once you change 20% of the permeable surfaces in that catchment, the creek system that happily was doing its thing for thousands of years can no longer do its job. So you will get erosion almost immediately once you start putting roofs, buildings, and change the nature. And so this catchment is actually about 82%, I think, covered in residential and commercial and industrial land uses. Norman Creek is where it's at. So this is a project where we work for the local council. We were lucky to win a tender with a massive team of interesting cats. And the strategy for us as a team, in a collaboration sense, really it's interesting. It begins before you win the job. You've got to actually line up the way this is going to work. So how do you translate systems thinking to a project at a catchment scale, which can be vast or small? You've got to do it before you've even won the job. You've got to have the right crew. So you need trust in the team and build on that unique notion. In our case, I actually think that we should change all political boundaries to catchment boundaries, because then the leaders of each of these places and cities would understand the connection that they have to this incredible ecosystem within each catchment. So within each catchment, you'll get different species mixes, subspecies, all sorts of complexity happening, that if you've got just one big, ridiculous colonial overlay, nobody's going to understand. So there's an idea. The second dot point's a funny one. This happened on the fly, so it's important. Well, I keep saying it's important. It's been my experience that you need to remain flexible with your process, and we had this situation where a large government organisation, and I know this is probably the case here, where nobody's talking to each other. So you're in a meeting with someone, and they're the water guy or girl, and then there's the open space person over here, and then there's the guy over here who's about to run 28 kilometres of pipes under the bit that someone over here just built. So a huge part of this job was actually playing matchmaker, which was a lot of fun, actually. It was like introduction agency for professionals. It got a bit weird a few times, I won't deny it. It did get a bit strange because you're actually digging into people's reason to live, your will to be. Why are you here? You know, wake up. Don't sit at the back of that boardroom. I've got 40 people in a room. Come and tell me what you want to get out of this time on this planet. And then we had a really nuanced, layered communications approach to deal with the complexity of the situation. One of the ideas that I had, which I really enjoyed, but this person didn't, was a communal bike tour. So that's my daughter, just hanging at the back, just throwing me daggers, lots of side eye, lots of, we're going up that hill, Dad? Yeah, great. So I know that she will not be going into landscape architecture at all, and nor will any of her friends, based on the amount of complaints from that particular day. But this was huge fun, so unexpected, make it fun. And we got a lot out of this moment. So we rode the whole catchment by bike and we didn't lose anyone. Nobody disappeared. The other thing is try and weave in as much of your day-to-day experiences. I used to really, not bag, but there was a guy in my office years ago who would always talk about, well, when I get on the bus and I use public transport, it was like, you're not the centre of the universe. Your opinion doesn't really matter so much, but actually your experiences and your thinking of others in the moment as a person, your agency to deliver the ideas is super critical. And so I used to go in this catchment, take my dog, that's Pablo. He's very fast and I would lose him a lot, but luckily he was large and white and I could see him in the distance. But morning walks, seeing the place, it's a big catchment, but being out there as a human at the micro and different times of day and night was critical. Notions of ownership. This is a super vague thing all around the world. It's not just who owns it, but who gives a rat's about it, who cares about it, because quite often they're different things. This is a case where there's a waterway and there's an industrial sort of facility which has now become a gym, and you couldn't tell who owns what, but all of that car parking pretty much is on council land and actually is run by, used by that facility for all the cars you can't see parked there because nobody goes there. We actually found through this process as a catchment, we were able to find properties that were fenced off timber hardware yards that are actually on parkland, and they've been operating for 30 years. So be diligent and you'll find some great wins for the community. And I found Pablo down there. My dog was in that culvert, just brown, so being white didn't matter anymore. I couldn't see him at all. But I just thought you'd be worried about whether Pablo made it home. He did, but he was a complete mess. He didn't care about boundaries or ownership, not one bit. And then where are the wins? This project actually predated the Green Grid project and actually was a precursor to connective thinking and how by joining the dots we can actually get great community benefit, not just for your commuter cyclists and your casual walkers, but also to walk to school, to go to the shops. If we can stop people needing to have such ridiculous reliance on cars and other motorised transport, then all of a sudden your air quality is better and you meet your neighbours. I was told a long time ago that one of the keys to long and fruitful life is to talk to strangers. Have you heard this story? If you talk to strangers in your local area, and a lot of you would do this intuitively, you're more likely to get the tap on the shoulder when you're going to get your fruit in the morning or your bakery goods. The baker's more likely to say to you, "Hey, Damian, you're looking a bit off colour today. Are you okay?" But if you're just transactional at the bakery, just put your money on the counter and walk out, old mate the baker is never going to notice that. He's never going to invest in that relationship. So the more people you meet in your daily life with genuine interaction, particularly the repetitive ones, and this has been proven, there's a great Lancet Journal article about this, if you want to dig up the numbers, you will live longer because you're more likely to get the help that you may need when you're out and about in your local community. So talk to strangers. It's a lot of fun. You'll learn some good things, as I have over the last couple of days. Thank you. So that's one of the wins. Huge win. Get nerdy. Get nerdy with the detail, because if you simplify your client-audience relationship, there's conjecture around you've got two lobes of the brain working, creative and linear at the moment. But I only ever failed one subject at university, and it was verbal communication in second year, because I liked to just talk about what was happening, but I didn't actually tick off the boxes. It was a conceded pass. I got through. It's okay. I didn't tick all the boxes for the technical requirements of the course. I was able to talk to the group about a topic I knew well, and that all went well, and everyone was happy at the end of it, but I didn't tick off the technical requirements. And that was a massive lesson. I should have put that person in as an influencer. This is a great example. We actually had physical maps as well, so it's not just digital. We're all going digital now, but nothing beats a great big master plan rolled out with acetate layers of all the things you can see here. And the people that don't want to have a casual chat and small talk about the feelings of things can go over here and go, that culvert there, this little road, I've got a bridge project, let's get going. And they have agency in the master planning conversation, which is critical. And here's a good example of that. So that's my client on the left of the page here. He's making notes about our performance and seeing that we're doing the right job. And a couple of our guys there, there's Claudia, who worked with me at the time. And these are all stakeholder representatives from that community, from the sports clubs, from all different parts of life. And it's really hard to kind of keep everyone thinking about why we're here and keep people engaged. But you have to respect that, because we've all been there. We've all gone, oh man, I've had a long day and I've just signed up for a consultation event from 7 to 9 p.m. about a creek. What? Is this where my life's got to? What am I doing this for? So stay human is the message with all of this. Another one, which we didn't do here, which we learned afterwards, was bring food, cater. Don't be stingy. Just some snacks. It doesn't need to be much. Just a gesture. Anything. If anything, it just helps the blood sugar in the system. You might get another good dot points out of your team then. These are all great things. Draw anything and start anywhere is another great way to uncork creative conundrums. Just draw anything. And I came across this photo of a sketch. I looked at it again last night. I really don't know what we were thinking when this drawing was done. But then it dawned on me, it was actually the way we were going to communicate the work at the next consultation event. It wasn't a spatial thing at all. It was a flow, a way of thinking. And it all came back to me. This idea of a barometer, a way to kind of test the pulse of the crew coming on the day was great. And it worked really well. And that wouldn't have happened unless Claudia, in this instance, took the cap off the pen and just scribbled. And then I've shown a few of these kind of images already. These are really quick. Digital collage is a technique we use a lot when you are trying to bring the audience there. It's not smell-o-vision. Maybe if there was cake there, that'd be cool. It's something to kind of engage you, but try and do a lot of these little renders. These took 5-10 minutes each. Just evocative bits and pieces from places that we know and love that work or don't work, whatever the case may be. Is this your future? We don't pretend to have all the answers, but the more engagement we can get with the people that are there in these community consultation and collaboration sessions, the better the outcome is, and they will own it. When you work in waterways, this is an issue. Fear of nature is a real problem with humans, and I think it always will be. But we tackle this head on, and with the water-sensitive urban design guys had great strategies for keeping the water moving, having the right species, predator species, management overlays and regimes. So we could. open the closet to these concerns in consultation and try and work out a way for the master plan to stitch it all together, which was a lot of fun. Multi-use everything is our mantra at LatStudios as well. If you can't get a whole lot of things out of public space, particularly in cities where there's not very much of it, you've got to work really hard to work three-dimensionally and programmatically to layer in activities so the community can get absolutely the most from that community spend. And yeah, get to the edge. This scary waterway edge. So this was a little montage that just suggested that people might, heaven forbid, might actually go down to the water's edge and see what's happening down there. So it's not just my dog that gets down there, that people are heading down, and we were, positing ideas about engaging with universities for research programs as well. So take the project into another world, another sphere, another range of thinkers. The university partnership model is a really good one. We've done that on plenty of amazing projects over the years. Again, left, right brain, or, linear thinker, loose thinker. Diagrams are great. Planners get very scared when urban designers start doing this because, hang on, that's Bob's, motorcycle shop, and you can't put an arrow through there because, but no, it's not about that. So, big gooey. I had to blow this up. This is why the image is a bit grainy. It was hilarious to look at this again because the diagram itself could be read at A3. So the strategy, the squint test, we do this with uni students. So if you squint at something and you get the idea, it might just be, I don't know, a facade color system that is actually flat, but it reads as a three-dimensional surface. Jakob, something like that. You squint at it, you get it. This is this as well, but hidden in the detail with this diagram were playgrounds, land acquisition, waterway management changes, new community nodes, devil in the detail. And then that's all well and good. If you've got a nice report, nobody really cares about it in a few years. But these two plans side by side for this part of this creek are really evocative, I think, because we can all talk a good talk, but out of the master plan came a design project for a little park here, Hanlon Park, which was the photo I showed earlier when I said, why the frown with the creek? When I moved to this part of the world when I was about 8, was taken just up here. So this is just a big dam. It's got a cricket field and a channel for the stormwater. The diagram before suggested a different reality. It showed it as intentionally hard angular edges. That green hatch, maybe the creek, maybe we could just tease it out a little bit and do something a bit more interesting here. Which has happened by another design practice in Brizzy, really talented crew, where it's working like a living, breathing system now. So we had a flood, I think, about 5 days after the thing was planted out. It was just ridiculous. So everyone's crossing their fingers. Is it going to work? I'm not sure. Do you want me to go back there, Mangon? Can I get that photo? Okay. I'm collaborating here with the audience. He'd kill me otherwise. A terrible photo of a blurry slide. Jan would not be happy. This is the same place, but down at eye level. So the grasses, because of the technical nous of the team and the introduction of rock, the knowledge of the flow rate. This is a creek that comes up really quickly and punches through. I'll just get a photo over here. This bit here, mate. Yeah, these rocks down here could actually start to break down the speed of the waterway. The planting held together really nicely. The team kept existing vegetation and places to hang out on the edge. But more importantly than that is to make sure that 99 times out of 100, the kids can get down there and hang out. Right? So this is, for us, the most important thing. The next generation, getting their hands dirty, meeting kids from across the street. They may, in a couple of years' time, they might be tagging walls with spray cans. I don't know, but that's just another way of engaging with the city, right? This is memory-forming stuff, and it's already been a massive boon for that community. And the Lord Mayor said this about it. So, again, it's political. Everything's political. You can't rest on your laurels with a great community outcome. You need to loop back into the really entrenched bureaucratic systems to get that message out there. Now, this kind of thinking, so Lord Mayor Graham Quirk was the previous Lord Mayor of Brisbane. He was trying to, grapple with what this whole thing meant, and by the end of it, he was really into it. And the next Lord Mayor, the current Lord Mayor of Brisbane, day one, coming into their role, he said, right, my focus is going to be parks and bridges. And that was 2 years ago. And now we've got a couple of bridges on the go. And that means that with the Olympic Games in 2032, we're actually going to get some great connectivity outcomes for the city out of pilot projects like this. Right, corridors. These are like catchments, but on a diet. They're skinny parts of a catchment, the creek corridor itself. And this guy here is a chap called John Wood. He was a mentor of mine. Not all mentors are on movie posters. This is an example of someone who, quietly spoken, hyper-intelligent dude, knew so much about recreation, open space and landscapes, and I hung off every word as a graduate. He was so generous with his time and knowledge, one-on-one, off-piste from projects. So, just in the lunchroom, he would make the time to actually engage with me. And I remember him, he's not with us anymore, unfortunately, but I remember him occasionally when I feel myself being lazy as a designer and not engaging with the team outside of project work, when you're so focused on writing proposals and preparing for something like this or doing a project work. So that fourth layer was what John brought to my professional career. Now, why is there a bird there? An example of how amazing this guy was. We were doing a project in North Queensland. It was a federal reserve, an army reserve, that there was a royal commission of inquiry into the reuse of this amazing pristine wilderness, possibly a national park. And we had to do this really detailed inquest basically into all the layers. So we did a visual amenities study which involved John and I being in a light plane flying 1 kilometre transects at a kilometre up over this landscape. On the third turn, I went green and I was useless for the next 2 hours. But John held it together, and we were mapping the landscape quality of that place from the air, and then we came back and hit the maps. And I kept noticing these little patches in the mosaic landscape, the coastal mosaic, of light coming through. And then when we were in four-wheel drive, I was driving through there, John said, you remember those patches? And I said, yeah, but what is that sound? And there were hundreds of these black cockatoos shredding a brush box tree in the coastal forest. Just, the poor tree did nothing. There were thousands of other trees just like it. And for no reason that science can understand, these birds, it's social behaviour, they call it. And somebody online may correct me with a question later, but as I understand it, it's a collaboration of sorts. But the net result of that one brush box being shredded and having its leaves taken off was what? Light coming to the forest floor. So that act generated it just triggers a whole range of other species in the soil mix to then germinate, head for the canopy and close that gap. So where you may have a monoculture, these new species or more brush box could come through. And it just was one of those moments. I think I was second year out of uni. We're up there in four-wheel drives, where I started to understand that systems thinking as it relates to place, and in this case, a corridor along the coast. Lovely guy. You've seen that photo again. We're still there. We're stuck. No one knows where to go. Where are we going? But I make the point about I was in a car, I was in a plane for that project, and I think personally I'm a huge advocate of cycling, and you don't see any of it in this city, which is obviously, I understand why that's not a thing. But thinking at the speed of bike is the best of both worlds, because you know, the young girl says that a cyclist very quickly becomes a pedestrian, which very quickly becomes a shopper. So you can get off your bike and stop. But you need room for this, I understand. But it's been a big part of our project work, this idea of cycling. All right, so corridor, Oxley Creek. This guy, I'll run through some stats with you in a second. It's a waterway in the light industrialised south of Brisbane. You can see the outline of the city itself and the river, and the black background area is the catchment, and the yellow area is the corridor. So out of this project, I just left thinking, well, it's all about the catchment really, but the boundary of the project was the corridor, and it's about politics. There's a reason behind it. Brisbane City Council did a very clever thing. They created a Quango, a company that was part council, part private interests, a totally new client structure that was able to leverage opportunities for land use changes in a place that would otherwise not have been doable. So the Lord Mayor said, make it so, and they created this company to basically push through something that would otherwise take 30, 40 years. And they had a metric was a certain percentage of the site to fund the project had to be converted to a new and profitable land use. So the city needs more light industrial, find a bit that doesn't flood and do it there. Really innovative, and again, it's more about the funding mechanisms to get a public space project up and running. We had a massive technical team, super talented, and the community representatives that were available, we dialed all of our consultation and collaboration techniques to that crew. So a stakeholder group that came in, and we could communicate the technical inputs in ways that would otherwise have been really tricky. I'll run through a few of those now. But as in most landscape architectural projects, looks can be very, very deceiving. I mean, you might look at this photo and go, well, it's a lovely waterway, wooded edges, and it largely is. But the nature of the soil and sands moving through here are such that a lot of heavy metals and such were trapped from previous land uses. There's a lot of burying of things out here. And a lot of our effort actually was about trying to maintain water quality and waterway health within that context. So how do you don't want to move some of that stuff, it needs to be dealt with. That part of the project is going to take a very long time to resolve, but there were some great land-based things that popped out of it. The politics of it, 70 k's of waterway, but only 30 of that was actually in the one municipality, the one government area. So you've got all the upstream works done by a different council, challenge. You've got a catchment versus a corridor, there's a challenge. And you've got a huge chunk of the city wrapped up in that particular part of the world. So the politics are pretty clear, how important that was to the city. Effectively, they wanted to, if you think of it like this, they wanted to extend the stay in the city by another day. How could you do that with a waterway corridor? It's pretty tricky. The team, the guys in green in this photo were part of the client group, and they were super integrated to the process, and these are stakeholders. You can see one of our guys there in the middle, she's drawing away on the plans. In the background, we've got all the maps and plans lined up. So they're very interactive and focused sessions that we got a lot out of. A lot of local knowledge was brought to the project. We tried to mix up our communication thinking. Look, you've got a timeline and an A3 document. How do you get it to fit? I just put this in. I thought it was a pretty cool way to it's like a maze to follow your way through the timeline. Of course, there's a whole lot of time pre-European occupation, which we couldn't get to in this project. And then trust the process. This is getting pretty heavy. There's a reason why economics is at the top, and I mentioned that before. The actual structure of the project was about trying to this thing's got to make money. Otherwise, none of these other things get measured. So we developed for the graphic designers in the room, we just developed an iconographic system which passes the squint test, so that when you're trying to outline complex strategies, you can see how they fit under those three headings: community started, 3 goals, economic, community and environment, then a delivery framework and priority projects. Just keep it really simple, as I mentioned before, but you can't do a corridor without a catchment. So whilst the job was actually defined by the extensive flooding plus a metre, it wasn't really going to work for us. We ended up doing a catchment master plan anyway, to be honest. Some of the numbers, one of the things that we were lucky in this space, the biodiversity is up there with some of the hinterland areas that a lot of tourists come to this place. So that was a surprise to us. So until you start to actually dig into the detail and understand what you've got, you may have a totally different, say for example, in this case, tourism proposition than was otherwise understood or communicated. There's a small group that would know that the bird species here in this wetlands were incredibly off the chart stuff, international migratory species. But getting that broader knowledge out to the community was tricky, but a key part of the project. And then another communication technique that we use a lot, these kind of AXO 3D views of, it's a bit like something for everyone. And you can we need to be democratic with what's happening with this place. there's a lot going on, but this image I like because it starts to define the edges. So we actually had an art program mooted, which was the industrial interface with the wetland zone and the corridor itself, which is another piece of the community. We pushed for connections to the community. We made sure that fauna habitat was critical, urban stormwater polishing was critical, boardwalks, and we were lucky that we had, a couple of Ks in some places to do that. It's not always possible to do all these things, obviously, if you don't have the room, but that's the nature of a corridor. It's constrained and contained. All the layers. This image is kind of funny. We used some people in this montage from another project you might have noticed, and the client pulled us up on it and said, I've seen these two ladies in the bottom left there before. Are you telling me they walked all the way from Victoria Park to get to this project? It was pretty funny. Apologies if you're watching. But that was a good reality check for us. And I said before, nuance your communication, but actually you've got to take some of that stuff seriously. That one slipped through the cracks. And here are the strategies mapped out for you to have a bit more of a detailed look. I like this project because it really focused on the economic critical nature of a public space project. I'm not sure here, but sometimes that component is just left off the table, but it is absolutely essential. In reality, it's what pays us to keep pushing. And then breaking it down, again, this is a chat about process and collaboration. So on the left is the diagram of all the strategic initiatives and where they might start to deposit themselves. We want a sense of equity through the corridor. We want a sense of connectivity. I was most excited by this yellow line that connected the river, Brisbane River, all the way up to Larapinta, this waterway, because you can then go all the way to the coast and reach Moreton Bay. But this image on the right is a good example of how to quickly get a hand-drawn sketch that I did about a little visitor centre, outdoor rec and tourism space, dropped into an aerial. The big moves are connected on top, so you've got a link between the strategic and the corridor. But pretty quickly, like now actually, the audience wants to get into the detail. When is it going to mean something for me? So quick hand-drawn sketches were critical, and then just keep it simple is the other story. This was actually the last thing we did, which is like a high-level exec summary of the project. It's tilted left to right, 90 degrees to get on the page, but this image became quite useful in very simply demonstrating the key elements of that complex months and months of work and technical rigor. What are we getting? Where is it going? Let's get on with it. So again, dialing that communication to 10 or 11. Now this saintly man is another one of my influences. I kind of like how he's got this glow about him. He's an academic from RMIT called Leon van Schaik. He's a very worldly man, and we were lucky enough to work a bit with him when I was at a previous practice about design thinking. And he creates drawings like this, which is unpacking your thinking in terms of spatial practice. It's a fascinating way of understanding your enchainments, is a term that he uses. So none of us can become progressive thinkers in the creative world unless you understand what it is that makes you tick internally and how to use that. He was also very challenging. Like, he took it really seriously when we had this interaction with him, to the point where some of the creatives that were in this session were, deeply kind of affected by his personal challenges and what they stood for. So just a reminder that, I always say that town planning is one of the most dangerous professions on the face of the earth, because they get to set the parameters and the edges of places well into the future with very little flexibility. I guess it is the colonial overlay in lots of ways: manage, organise, sell. If you are dabbling in that space, as many of us work in the urban design realm, you need to understand your baggage, your enchainments, and how that might change and motivate an outcome spatially that might actually have a whole lot of subconscious bias buried in it. So I commend Leon van Schaik's work to you to have a look at. timely because he was very instrumental working with a project called ARM, Ashton and Raggett McDougall in Melbourne, very cutting-edge architectural firm who partners with us on this project at the Gold Coast. So this is the Commonwealth Games Athletes Village, Parklands, and we had the unique issue with collaboration, don't talk to anyone, whatever you do, because there was a deadline for the Commonwealth Games. We were designing the Athletes Village, but we were not able to really engage with a lot of the stakeholders, and particularly not from a First Nations perspective at all. We had to work with the government agencies to give us the kind of feedback we needed to develop this in a timely fashion. We had an epic team. We did lean on that process. I guess if you don't have a chance to collaborate with the community, which is normal for us, then you've got to get the client to actually provide that input, which they did, and then just get cracking. We'll come back to that image in a second. So it began, the arc of this project was, again, fenced off. So single-use, trotting track, just junk, beautiful big space on the Gold Coast. The history of development on the Gold Coast is linear. It's a linear city, as you guys would know, down to the southern edge of Queensland, and all behind that are these waterways. There's almost as many canals on the Gold Coast as Venice, apparently, but that comes at a cost. So they've carved through a lot of this back of the beach landscape, but this is a pocket that was roughly intact. And then about 2 months later, this was happening to get to the program. So there was a huge construction boom, and I've got a little slide of that here, which just shows as an overlay the impact of our master planning decisions over time. Up the top is the park emerging, and then it'll go back to a pond. That's the racetrack. So again, single-use public space. It's political because a former minister, I'm sure, was instrumental in creating a trotting track and a dog track on the site, and the fence around the outside as well. Luckily, that kind of landscape wasn't being used very well, and we needed a good site for the Commonwealth Games Athletes Village. The other thing that I like about this project is that right next door is a massive public hospital and a private hospital, which is being built at the same time, and the Griffith University Gold Coast campus right here as well. So we're able to connect up a new street grid system, an orthogonal street grid system over a 1 in 20 slope down to the hill. And then you can see up here, and I've got some more images, the park itself emerging at the bottom. Big picture, gap in the system, join the dots, bit of a no-brainer, take down the fences. Question to the timing crew, so there's 40 odd minutes left. Okay, and that leaves enough time for a chat. We're going all right? Okay. Just give it a heart. So again, these diagrams were really critical. You can imagine from a communication perspective with governance, we're about to spend a whole lot of money on an athletes village. There's a big party coming up, very similar to the Olympic Games coming up. How do we make sure that the thing is completely rock and roll and has purpose? And a simple story about a heart was a great way to do that, linking up all the perimeter elements. Create a hierarchical system for this precinct. Where's the high street? It connected logically the light rail, and I'm going for this guy, the light rail station, which was outside the project, down the hill, to an urban square which linked to Main Park with another boulevard and several development parcels and residential parcels. So a cruciform plan which worked very well, linking to a main street down here and an existing connection up there. And the reason why it was so simple was because, you know, the project didn't have much time. Active transport's critical. Focusing your energy is critical. This is also critical. The job had zero budget. It was something like 13 or 14% of a typical, for the residential lots, I think it was 20% of the budget of a normal residential landscape in southeast Queensland we had to spend. So we had to be super efficient about where we actually focused the money. Had no budget. And then again, linking it all together, because we really had no budget. So where do you spend your money? Where's the best bang for buck? And out of this analysis of the constraints of the project and the budget came the idea of focusing on the heart. get an overall structure that they can build, no-brainer. Integrate water-sensitive urban design thinking into all that. We had a very clever water scientist on the project who discovered that the hospital stormwater system was a bit overcooked and we didn't need to actually bring as much of their water into our site. This is a new park that we built down here, and to the north of the page is a creek called Bigara Creek. So we posited an idea that there would have always been another creek through here. And so I got to name a creek for the first time in my life, and we named it Little Bigara Creek, just because it was fun to say. And that Little Bigara Creek connects from down here, comes up to the lake system itself, which is an expression of the macro waterway system of the Gold Coast, which I'll get to in a second. So all of the streets were designed with rain gardens, where the gradients worked, the lots drained into the creek. The other big win was just calm the farm on the grey infrastructure. The initial engineering to create one big park was to have a pipe from here to here, which was going to cost millions of dollars. And the team came back to the client and said, well, you know what, for about 10% of that, we can actually create a creek for the community to engage in, as opposed to, and then I got to name a new creek, which was a lot of fun. But telling that story or selling that story is part of the journey. So these diagrams, hand-drawn again, layering the notion of water right through the site, helped us get some momentum with the client group and make it happen, as did the planting strategy. So this is a fun way to think about how your landscape could actually be an abstraction of a much bigger regional landscape. And this is, there's some beautiful hills up behind the Gold Coast. If you ever go there, it's worth an exploration. There's some gorgeous places, waterfalls and waterways. And because the Com Games was, if you like, an international event, we chose a planting and landscape strategy that actually abstracted that much bigger landscape system in the parklands itself, which was a lot of fun. And then you get into the details, so you just got to make sure that it all hangs together as a place, and a place for everything. We designed some furniture in the streetscapes that were actually an abstraction of the basalt columns from the erupting volcano up the coast 23 million years ago. And have some fun, make a family of things. So when the party was on, it was actually really great to see through Instagram all of the different ways that the place was being used. That was a rap battle at the top there. I don't understand rap battles, if someone can explain them to me, but there was a battle and there were words said and people dancing. It seems like the best kind of battle you can have, really. That was happening impromptu with some international athletes, and then just places to hang out. So the bottom, this bottom left image down, bottom middle, were some custom bike racks that we made and some seats with our limited budget that were abstractions of this much bigger old story about the landscape, inspired by an ancient story. So there's a thing called natural arch right at the top of the hill behind the Gold Coast, which is an amazing situation where a creek has run through some basalt rock over the last 23 million years to create this ancient waterway and waterhole, and that water system connects right down to the coast. So 23 million years ago, Mount Warning, which is, you guys know Byron Bay, that area sort of over the border of New South Wales, it exploded and it was a big bang. And there are bits of that explosion on Fraser Island, hundreds of kilometres north. Indian Head's one of those systems. All of these bits of rock that the lava escaped the volcano. You can imagine being there and seeing this huge mountains flying through the air and then rivers of lava following. But that interaction with the ocean actually created some of the world's best surf breaks ever known. Because you've got rock, and you've got a northern drift of the ocean, and you've got sand. It's just manna from heaven. And yeah, I would never go out in that. That's just crazy talk. But this is not an unusual situation that happened on the Gold Coast. So there are surf breaks down on the Gold Coast now that have international status as a kind of World Heritage version of being a surfing attraction. Amazing. So that story, when you're doing a precinct, how do you tell that story in the place? How do you, with limited budget, make that a thing? Well, we went back to that mystical place that I showed before, the Natural Arch. This is it with glowworms. It's not a great pic, but I quite like it actually when you squint at it. it is truly magical, and it's not very big, but the sound of water is gorgeous. And out of that, we created an abstraction in the park itself. So this is a one-off shade structure, a parasol that sits on the edge of a lake at the heart that I mentioned before in the diagram. And it's made using Gold Coast boat building craftsmen. So it's this idea of using local artisan boat builders to create a polymold system to go together as a structure designed by ARM. And it is a beautiful thing. So this wouldn't have happened unless we'd gone through all of those steps of convergent thinking and strategic thinking to focus what an outcome could be. There's an oculus where water falls, so that is, if you like, the start of the water story, abstracted in the mountains. These are basalt boulders from the local area at the base. This is a great spot for kids to run around, and then it heads north through these waterways down through Little Bigger Creek. And a place of great memories. I'm not sure if these guys did actually win, but I think they kind of feel like they're winning, don't they? Who designs these mascots, by the way? Who gets the... I reckon the budget for the mascot design would have been more than my landscape construction budget, this project. I've got questions for people with the Commonwealth Games spreadsheets. A little side project on the same park, a few years later after the Com Games, we were commissioned to do a small park to commemorate Harmony Day. And do you guys have that here? It's a day around the world where people just focus on community interaction and being human together. The inspiration for a piece of this park furniture came from these walls in the UK, which were, ironically, also listening devices for, I think it's pre-radar. So somebody would sit here, and the sound of the enemy aircraft would be amplified through a parabolic curve to a particular point that you could get advance warning, and then they would be off and getting ready. And they tried different versions of it. So we took that piece of war engineering and we made it into this thing called a listening seat, which is two precast concrete elements, and they actually work really well. So you can sit, it's a moment of quiet reflection. So how do you be by yourself but be together at the same time? And this, we work with an engineer to get the curves right, and it's quite an amazing little place for all ages and all abilities. You can see the main heart in the background there. So the life of public places, when there's a strong story, you can continue with that and it evolves as you go. And this is a great example of something pretty small and low-key that happened there. So I have a time lapse again. That's the park on the right, so we're down a bit lower. The builder was very clever, and I'm glad they got these images for us. You can see the grass going in. That was an exciting day when we turfed the main park. This is up to the east of the site. We also had a range of public spaces scattered around, so it wasn't just the big show of the main park. And that's the view back to the ocean from the hospital, looking across the site as well, just watching the residential towers come in. So like many places, the big move here was to get medium to high density housing on public transport corridors with great amenity and open space systems connected to health and employment nodes with light rail at the top. It's a bit of a dream conurbation of thinking, to be honest. But we also had to do the streets really well because, like here, everyone drives a car and we all seem to have more than one car each, which is crazy. And here's the civic heart being built, the steel framing of the main oculus structure, the parasol, with the cladding soon to come. This perimeter form was this kind of whimsy, again, I'm not sure how the architects managed to get the budget for that, but it's got some vines growing up in it now. It's a wonderful secondary moment, just embracing that main ocular place, which has now become an entrenched part of the community, and it's got more layers and stories to tell. So I'm on to my last place, I think. This is a guy called Troy Casey. This is a very recent, influential person that I'll... can you actually take a photo of this? Because I'll send it to him. He's a mate of mine. Yeah. So... this will freak him out. He doesn't know this is happening. He's a very humble guy. He is a proud First Nations man from Australia. He works in Brisbane, and he's got a company called Blacklash. And what's been exciting for us over the last little bit in Australia, particularly, is an emerging connection to country through First Nations thinking, designing with country, is a part of that, the ancient practice these guys have had for a long time, and it's starting to become more embedded in our projects. And last year we were lucky enough to run the National Festival for the Institute of Landscape Architects in Australia with the theme of country. It was an amazing experience, very emotional actually, about connection to place. Beyond anything else, it was deeply personal. We had an incredible smoking ceremony on the river right in front of, I love this photo, the juxtaposition of ancient practices and an emerging city on the river. Very powerful way to start. But I thought I'd talk about this today in the context of collaboration. So this is actually quite similar, although I'm up on a stage. This conference was the first time in the country that the only people that were on stage were First Nations people from creative backgrounds. So typically, an Indigenous person, a traditional owner from Australia, would be on a panel with me or someone else of varying backgrounds, but never before had they been given agency in that setting as a national conversation. It was a bit tokenistic, which they were all pretty stoked about. That momentum, that idea won us the gig to actually run the conference, which, as some people here can understand, can be quite the challenge. So thank you again for everything you've done. And in this instance, out of that idea of collaboration became the story of a central talking circle, a small dais, nothing too high. We were given access to an amazing amphitheatre room, but people looking down on the conversationalists was seen to be too culturally unsafe, too imposing. So the whole setup was around the audience being secondary to the conversation. And then we had these beautiful woven mats from Northern Australia above that, and they have become, if you like, the holder of that conversation. So architects, urbanists, urban designers, landscape architects, all First Nations people all gathering and talking about how they see the future of the public realm, public domain and cities. It was an amazing experience, and there's some things online. Part of the curation of that collaborative event, for those that may be thinking about doing festivals and such in the future, the nature of the previous slide, you can see a room full of people listening intently. That's exhausting for anyone. So we had a secondary program set up in tents outside the main speaking room, where there were a stack of activities on offer for people to actually just do something with their hands, create montages physically. Those leaves are all lemon myrtle leaves. They're beautiful, highly pungent leaves, gorgeous things. Inside these tents that were nice and hot, and they had to work together. So we put them in groups, and there were thematic overlays. But it was just the most wonderful experience, because then they were replenished personally. You could come inside and sit back in the lecture theatre and then go again and hear the next conversation. We also had lots of breakout spaces for quiet contemplation as well. And at the end, all of the efforts of the audience were pulled together by that chap on the left there, Tristan, whose brainchild this all was, into one big collage. And I must admit at the start, when you say we're going to get everyone at a 2-day conference, 3-day conference, to create one massive artwork, what is it going to be? The thematic threads, everyone there was a landscape architect or similar, but the thematic threads that emerged, the challenges, the queries, the pain, the emotion, and the hope for the future was all embedded in that. And Tristan wove a beautiful story around what that meant for the next step and implications for our professional body and how we should take that story forward and influence everything going ahead. And there's some of the key collaborators there. So university, professional practice, First Nations, amazing experience. So the fifth project, Victoria Park Vision, is a place without a purpose at the moment. It's just been grabbed as an Olympic venue, so we may not see some of this stuff built, but they're doing bits and pieces of it in the council at the moment. We had an amazing team collaborating on this one. This is before the conference, we tried to understand our First Nations position and found that system didn't, a bit like the green grid, there was no way that we could actually interact with that beyond a few different people. That was very challenging. and a whole lot of consultation. The approach was really go down the multidisciplinary path with the team. Wilkinson Eyre were critical in collaborating on the architectural structures and a technical team beneath that with us running it. So yeah, so landscape architects running projects. That's something we've been pushing for a long time. The ability to bring together a broad tribe of thinkers and different technical inputs to create an incredible community outcome. We think landscape architects are actually uniquely placed to do that, certainly in the Australian context, and from what I've seen here as well. It would be amazing to see more leadership, but with that you need structure. So governance structure to help that happen is tricky. Clear process again, similar themes you can see, each of them tuned into the particular needs of Vic Park. The consultation process was really maximising community input. We had, I think, 15 or 16 of the team from LatStudios going around tables, talking to people, asking them what their thoughts were on various matters and huge big plans as well. To the point where we thought, oh, you've got to remember, did I mention this was a golf course? So, I don't know, does anyone here play golf? Are there any golfers in the room? Going over there? I'm safe to say this, it's another one of these single-use, like horse racing, single-use activity that takes up a huge footprint, which would otherwise be an issue. And we do know through COVID, fences were being torn down literally in other cities for people to get access to these big green lungs, these resources in the middle of town. So we suggested that there should be a party on the 18th green as a bit of a provocation, and luckily it came off. So we had an amazing community fun day out in the park. The golfers had to stow their weapons for a day, and luckily the decision had been made to wind up the golfing activity apart from the driving range, which is quite a lucrative part of the master plan. Also important, and I touched on this earlier, I think it's an obligation for us when we're conducting these projects to think beyond the clique, the group that we're in. Try and imagine from somebody with a mobility issue or an age and dependency issue, or even a different species. What are their needs for this place, and how can we all combine our intellect to do it? And this big, this rash diagram, which we love using, is a big voting system for people to actually start to get hierarchical about what they think is critical. It's a bit of a flawed system because, somebody puts a lot of dots on and then everyone follows sometimes, but it depends on how good the consultation process to date was. And then work the numbers. So you've got the hearts and minds happening, but also the technical requirements. This idea of extended visitation stay. The park is right above the CBD, so it actually could be an incredible... It's nowhere near the size of Central Park. Central Park is massive. I don't know if you've all done the measure of it. You got lost in it before. It's huge. Everyone says, we'd like a Central Park in Bangkok. And the thing's enormous. It would be impossible to put in. It was a great investment at the time. This was about a tenth of a Central Park in size, but the impact on the economy could be massive. And then looking at what's happening with the kinds of people that are, the demographics of the place. Interesting stat. At the moment, a third of people that live in my city were born elsewhere. So it's a place attracting huge numbers. So what do they need? They're bringing great stories from other places. How can we tap into that? And then the age thing. Make it fun, for goodness sake. Give these people something to do if they're going to live in an apartment. Big parks are critical. And then the growth trajectory for us is staggering. When I look at what's happened in Bangkok since the 70s to now, that's next level, clearly. This is a global issue. How to maintain quality of life in a city with incredibly burgeoning population numbers, and no one's making any more parks, right? So we did do a project recently called Parkapelago, which was a desperate attempt to create more open space in the city by using floating parks. So pontoons that connect to each other, and it was almost, we were welding up the barges to make a prototype of it, and then COVID started, so we didn't get to realise it, but that might be another way with sea level issues that we can start to get more public spaces in cities, and I think we've seen that in New York with Heatherwick Studios thing recently, going out into the water. As Mongorn knows, I'm a big fan of sketching. I was both surprised and delighted and a bit scared that an early sketch that I did, which is the white over the top of this master plan, just for clarity, kept getting used. So be careful what you draw. It might actually end up in the final master plan document. But sometimes those moments where you've soaked up all the information, and a lot of people here will find that there are only a few of us that can actually translate that into a drawing. It's quite an unusual thing to be able to do. So if you've got that in your armoury, go with it. Keep testing it. You won't always draw things as beautifully as Mangwon can, but have a crack. So this drawing, and my other favourite thing about drawing is when in doubt, use the whiteout pen. So this was drawn with a white pen over an aerial photo, and it's a great way to get incredible depth and effect over the sketch. So the beginnings of circulatory system. We know through our research that from a wellness perspective, linearity is the devil. Everything, if you can, make it organic and fluid. From moving through cities, moving through parks, a curvy path isn't there just because it's a kind of loosey-goosey thing to do. It actually can provide profound mental health benefits for those that use it a lot, because your eye's always looking in a different direction. You're moving through different landscapes, different topography, and then where the things should go, cultural centres and so on. It's good fun. Need to draw more. Always study the context. You guys know this. From a political perspective, we have to make sure that all of the money being spent on the public transport infrastructure, for example, is going to be tapped into by the park. So how do you lay down on that? Keep listening. This is what we heard from the crew, the community. The biggest thing they wanted, just give us some nature. It's pretty simple, really. It's a wordle of the things they were after, and the kind of percentage stack, the 8 most wanted. It sounds like a bit of a mugshot. We should have Keith Richards there standing up. Profile shot. Picnic and barbecue, it's simple stuff, nature play. And each community will have their own version of this. This is the only way that we can actually manage our budgets on the public projects. And from that, we created a whole lot of visual icons that started to tell the story of what everyone thought was really important. From being very place-specific as an outcome, really developing a cultural narrative for the park from a First Nations perspective. Creative expression, that was a cool one. That was basically make it fun. Don't just give us a whole lot of bland little park structures, actually make it compelling from a creative perspective. And build relationships, which is all about ongoing management and maintenance and the continued love. In the places we go to that we love are because somebody else loves them and takes care of them. And then model it. We've got a pretty clever team, and we used a SketchUp model with Enscape pretty extensively to create a sense of the rolling topography of the place and describing things. We also created a whole lot of montages to, again, as I mentioned before, get people in the space. What if you could have a treetop walk and a water play experience side by side with a bridge in the distance, so you can always see where you need to get to if you need to get to somewhere else? Wouldn't that be amazing? What if there was a place that you could always go to and there'd be something cool happening, something amazing to bring your international visitors to if you so chose? This is a big one. I mentioned before with the umbrella idea on the Victoria Park Bridge. Don't go too crazy with, don't always go too crazy with your propositions if you know that you just need to get things done. So this is just a simple idea of recreating a waterway. This used to be a chain of ponds, an ancient chain of ponds through this parkland for thousands of years. So trying to bring some way for the community to connect to this water story from a water management perspective was super important. And this is something we do struggle with in Australia. The safest places are the places that work 24/7 or 27 as much as you can get them. There's no point having amazing connective tissue bridges between city and suburbs if my kids aren't going to go there after 5 o'clock at night. So the only way to do that is to make sure that there's activity nodes along the way, excellent lighting and all of the good stuff with SEPTED. And communal as well. I talked about this in the earlier. So this is interesting. So the Green Grid project posited a community desire to actually get engaged more with the growth of foodstuffs. And here it is emerging as a project at Vic Park, very strong connection to that community in an area that is really just trees and grass at the moment. And then really going back to that 24/7 experience, if you're going to do the model, try and find ways that you can actually communicate as much as possible to a big audience. And this little fly-through was done by our team. Really important. Look at the colour tones of the entries. They wouldn't be that bright orange, but your eye's drawn there. Where are the gathering places? This is a great angle, a sense of topography, which is not really known to a lot of people. Brisbane gets a bit hilly, as per that slide in the green grid pack. Where am I going to park my car? Does the driving range still stay there, and can it actually feel like it's part of a bigger park? Yes, it can. Are there secondary and tertiary destinations up in the forest? How do I get access down to the university campus? That's that orange node just down there to get people up in from a disability acceptable perspective, and bridges over to the schools beyond. It's a pretty powerful tool. We didn't really need to do it, I think, in the brief in the end. I'll have to fact check myself on that, but it became an incredibly powerful design tool for us to actually get to a political level of discussion of where we should invest and where we shouldn't. And then, of course, Big Arnie's still coming. Well, this is T2 actually. This is the second Terminator. He's in that truck. And I'm still here packing it, running, talking to you guys, because it's still coming. So, in our lifetime, we need to affect positive change as much as we can. And that anxiety, and I think Bruce Mau's Incomplete Manifesto of Growth will give you some tips on enjoying that anxiety that you get when you're up here talking to people and when you've got to push through your comfort zone. That's a good thing. Embrace it, run with it, use that energy for good, because it's still coming. And then I landed, and this pops up in my feed, right here, the endless summer of Bangkok, just 3 days ago from today, sweltering heat, serious issues with the city, all of the major concerns of global urban life played out right here. So in a weird way, this could actually be an incredible place to test radical change for how we engage with nature in our cities in a way that we can see the next 7 generations still happily doing so. So it is on us, absolutely. That's a photo I took when I was landing into the heat a few days ago. But just remember, we're all better together. So I can't thank you enough for giving me the chance to pull these thoughts together and share them with you. It's been wonderful meeting a lot of you for the first time, and I look forward to more conversations about how we can sort this all out. So thank you.
Thank you. So as for the conversation that Mr. Damian Thompson mentioned, we will have the Q&A session, and we are very fortunate to have another professional architect here to moderate the sessions. And for this, before I invite her on the stage, I would like to urge the audience here, if you would like to ask the question, please wait for the cue from our moderators. And you can also ask the question in Thai as well, because when I look at our architecture students over there, AKU, right? สถาบันเกษตรใช่ไหมคะ They took a lot of notes, so I wonder if they have questions for Mr. Thompson a lot too. But I have heard that if you like to ask the question in Thai, our committees here, they are kind enough to they are going to translate for you as well, just in case. But I as well, I have prepared the interpretation device for the presenters too. So please do not worry about language barriers. Please feel free to ask questions, and for the online audience as well. Okay, and it is the time for me to invite the associate and project director, the senior landscape architect. This is one person, and then she is from the PL Design Company Limited. Please welcome Miss Natalie Schneider.
Hello. Okay, hi everybody. Well, thank you, Damian. That was amazing. I feel like I almost don't have any questions. I just want to applaud you. First of all, I'll tell you, I'm a bicycle rider. I ride my bike every day, so I'm on your team.
I knew I liked you.
Mainly for the shopping aspect. I know how
Still
easy
like
it
you.
is. I can park, don't have parking. But yeah, that was really amazing. I think I'll just quickly mention in Bangkok we have a couple of projects. We have a golf course that's been turned into a park, and we have a racetrack that's currently being turned into a park.
Fantastic.
So I feel hopeless about Bangkok, but maybe in some ways we're ahead. But we have fences around our parks. We just need to get rid of those. Yeah, and also we're 24/7.
Yeah, you've got that. It's very
I feel-
inspirational, actually, got that one covered completely.
Yeah, definitely feel safer here than in Australia. The key thing is real. I used to carry my keys every day when I walked home from the train station, so that's great. So I think my first question is, can you move to Bangkok? We need a green grid.
Yeah, let's do it. I mean, that job actually was, as I said, something we kind of dreamt up ourselves. So, you know, it's easy to sit back and wait for others to kind of posit these concepts and even competition entries for you to enter. But you all have so much agency and so much intelligence to bring to cities that don't wait is my provocation to all of you. Just get it on paper, speak to your local, minister or political person and get cracking. But yeah, I'd love to come up here more.
So, I'm not sure how we take the questions. Do people just put up their hands? So would anybody like to ask a question? Just put up your hand or maybe yell out because it's quite glary, hard to see.
Hi, thank you. That was a vibrant presentation. I got so many useful tips. I have so many questions. I'll do a quick one. So are you the only, LatStudios is the only landscape office in Brisbane because you are doing so many projects that we want to do? And second is, who pays for this project? And are they being realized? How many of them? How many percent? And the last question was about the fence. Why is it turned down in the first place? And is it happening like somewhere else as well? Thank you.
Okay, so that's 4 questions. It's good. So we are not the only landscape practice in Brisbane. Part of the confusion with 27, when we moved to Melbourne, the studio was called Lat37. And down there, nobody got it. I'm like, what, 37? What are you talking about? Who are you? Are you 2 practices? Is this a franchise model? What's going on? So we shifted the business to LatStudios, which was simpler. Keep it simple, being the kind of mindset. That has helped us communicate nationally about some of these issues and now internationally, which is awesome. So the last question was fences, and then you remind me of the second one in a second when I get there. But the fences are political. The ownership system that we have in our cities, who has and who hasn't got something, just speaks so loudly to the disenfranchised. So symbolically, in COVID, when those golf course fences were being torn down, that was a political act, and it was good to see people actually giving a damn about, seeing the green space. And these are people that are very privileged and very well off. I'm not gonna. There's no sugarcoating it. There weren't people that were disenfranchised with society generally. These are just people that wanted to get access to, because you could only walk 5 minutes in a circle, and the penny dropped. All of a sudden, there's all this green space. So I'm really stoked to hear that those projects are going ahead here. Things getting built. I think the Norman Creek job showed you some built outcomes. The Vic Park project is underway at the moment. The Green Grid project has spawned. We can't take the whole credit for some new bridges that are getting built now, but sort of gave it a nudge. And we've got 2 of those projects on the books that are getting built now. So by 2024, we'll have another chat. There'll be a stack of built outcomes from those strategies. So that gives us hope, that it's worth talking about complex, big issues for the next generations and getting that conversation rolling. And a big part of it is just trying to make it really obvious and really simple. Like here, you know, we call it effective footpath width. The width of footpaths compared to the width for cars or motorists is quite staggering actually in Bangkok. You know, the lack of pedestrian, and I know the weather is a reason to not walk, but what that also means is that you cram in that 1 metre zone that you've got mostly around the city, 1.5 metres, you're cramming your services, your power poles, a couple of trees are trying to, you know, make out an existence, whereas the new technology for urban trees is connective trenches and soil volumes is the only way to go for large tree growth, so you can actually create, and that would deal with your subsidence issues because the trench would move with the pavement systems as that micro-settling happens. So big, you know, find out where your really critical pathways are, hospital to school to retail, rip up the roads, get the trenches in and get some big trees happening, because that stat of 20% increased urban tree cover could equal 3 or 4 degrees drop in urban heat temperature, might just be enough for you to decide to go outside or not. You know, that change. And we've got to future-proof cities too. So, yeah, there's a lot in there. Thanks for the question.
The bridges, they're pedestrian bridges.
Yeah, they call them green bridges, which is a bit of a greenwashing term, but they often have public transport and pedestrian and bikes. So there's one to the uni at the moment that's being built. There are straight pedestrian bridges as well that are being built at the moment. There's one from Kangaroo Point over to the city, which unlocks all of that section of the city. So where they can, they get public transport connections, but the couple that are coming through are mostly pedestrian and emergency vehicles.
That's really interesting because we're just getting some new sky trains and they've built these new bridges. I mean, they've been built now and they're only for the train. But that's really interesting. They could have made a pedestrian.
Yeah.
You came too late.
That one, they'll keep building. That's the job. Some of the better, like even commercially for us, some projects that are part of large infrastructure projects, big engineering budgets, they will invest in doing it properly. You know, they get it. Trying to tack it on later is impossible, as we know. But getting the agenda up front, so we get involved with a lot of visioning for new projects where if you can demonstrate, like through some of the stats I threw up there, the public benefit, the health benefits, a whole other scary presentation around walkable cities that we could put up. Queensland's the skin cancer capital of the world, just about. So the public health cost down the line of not having shady streets is massive in urban areas, let alone the silent killer, which is the urban heat island effect, which unfortunately for our cities impacts the elderly and the young. You know, what kind of city are we making if we're actually making it harder to live for our, you know, the people that have invested their whole lives in these places? So there's a social impetus. If you can wrap some stats around that, you can get good multiple outcomes for big infrastructure projects. They're the ones to really target.
I think Namchai's last question was about who pays for these
Your
parks.
fee.
Yeah. I always forget that bit, as my partners will tell me, I'm sure if they watch this. Often we pay. You know, like we have stumped up our own, like the Green Grid was partially funded by our practice, really scratching that itch about a gap in the thinking, policy thinking and strategic thinking for the city, a public-facing gap. A lot of those things that we talked about are known and were happening internally at council, but you know we didn't have access to that. So Natalie, not this one, my business partner Natalie and I went down to Sydney and Melbourne. So as a process, we interviewed the government architects in those two cities and a few other places to discuss what successes they were having, so we could bring that information back to our conversations with the Brisbane council people, the government people, to affect change and try and get the budgets to work. So nobody's going to pay me to go and fly down to have a chat with somebody in a different city about a project that doesn't exist yet. But out of that has spawned a whole lot of other, so it's just paying it forward, a lot of other conversations and projects. So the bridge projects are funded. We're paid as a consultant, sub-consultant mostly to an engineer or an architect. And sometimes, you know, for the park projects, Victoria Park, we were the lead consultant, partnering with an engineering lead, and then a whole lot of other experts supporting that, including other landscape architectural firms from a landscape heritage perspective. So they are commercial projects, but you know they're love projects too. Like we just love them. So we spend a lot more time that doesn't hit the books to make it the best possible outcome because we understand how important it is. But the majority of them are funded now. But we still bring out the green grid. You know, it's a few years old now, but it's still a very powerful document to suggest change.
What about the ownership of the land? Is it usually all owned by the, say, Brisbane City Council, or are there different owners?
Yeah, the big arm wrestle in Brisbane is between the state government and the local government. So Brisbane City Council is one of the biggest local government agencies on the planet. It has incredible potential and opportunities, but also it's big. So it doesn't have the same, like I lived in Sydney for a decade, and all the small councils in Sydney make for a really interesting place because they're all competing with each other. So the politics of getting people to live in a certain area actually translates directly into the quality of the public domain because it's seen as an amenity uplift. So having one big city council, they can think strategically, but you don't always get those little detailed moments. The state government owns a lot of land in the inner city as well. All the infrastructure typically is state government. We have the same issue with, you know, useless single-use bits of infrastructure land that could actually be, you know, workshops, community assets, meeting rooms, but there's no budget for that because that's not their core business. So we have that struggle to try and join the dots, but they're really owning up to that. And you know, we have enough room, luckily, for some active transport options too, with the rise in e-mobility. So the second car now is a scooter or an e-bike, which is cool, but it's not cool if the roads are deadly. So that we're having that chat at the moment as well. So ownership, tricky one. We have a similar issue where it's private ownership to the river in Brisbane, and that's stymied. That's stopped a whole lot of connectivity outcomes along the riverbank. That would be a democratic outcome for the people of that place, which would be awesome. It would also help us understand it and adjust the edge condition of the intertidal zone. If you have room there, sectionally, you can help mediate what's happening. If somebody owns and has a private dock to a boat all the way along the inner city reaches, then you're stuck. So we've got a floating, or it was floating until we had a flood, then it went away, but we have a fixed pontoon now out in the river for one part of the city that it's slow. So sometimes you've got to create your own ownership. Yeah.
It's interesting that you just mentioned ownership, given that the whole of Australia was very recently owned by other people. We colonialists have actually stolen it. And you mentioned input by First Nations people. How much input is there actually in projects that you do, and is the input real or just tokenism?
Thanks, good question. I know where you're coming from.
I ask it because at the moment, if you're Australian, it's very topical, isn't it? I mean, it's top of the agenda at the moment.
Yeah, it's a good one. As I mentioned before, it's a global issue. So we've got so much to learn from First Nations people globally in areas that have been colonised heavily, like Australia. That door's opening up. So the projects I mentioned, over the last 10 years or so, have tried to unpick that proper engagement process, and I've had some spectacular failures. One of Bruce Mau's things is, as I mentioned, I think just embrace your mistakes. I went too fast and hard at engaging with a First Nations community member without having developed any kind of trust with that person. So why would they bother to help out with a proposal for a thing that may not even happen? But out of those, bumbling, well-intended, but ultimately, not great starting points, we sat back and went, well, there's a few people telling some amazing stories about proper First Nations engagement in Australia. And guys like Kevin O'Brien, who's been doing it for 30 years, who combines art and architecture and First Nations thinking all around the place, and a few other people. We got to chatting, and it culminated actually in last year's conference, which again is another free project in a way. It was with the Institute of Landscape Architects. So I kind of sidelined my practice for 5 months, helping set that up as a conference. And through that, that's why I put Troy up there before. You know, he's an amazing character. He's not a trained designer. He's an art curator, and he's got various other strings to his bow. But he can see a number of problems with the way we make cities and the lack of understanding of those old stories, because there's no trust there between the community at the moment. So that's going to take time before there's proper engagement. There's education streams coming through universities, which are amazing, and other platforms like, you know, weirdly sporting clubs like the Broncos in Brisbane have got some good programs and are putting money into it. We're very cautious about cultural appropriation. Is a real issue for non-Indigenous Australians. So you need to collaborate with the likes of Troy, Blacklash and other crew to bring community along that journey, and that takes a lot of time and requires a lot of trust. So one of my slides, you know, time's a funny thing. You know, I'm often in a rush to do things, but this is one topic where we just all need to take as much time as possible to get the right outcomes for their community, because ultimately what they really want is a voice at the table, but also agency, so that the next generations of First Nations people have got the same opportunities I had, you know, as a product of colonialism coming here, my family, you know, a few generations back to Australia. So it's a really slow one, but there's some great individuals, really clever, smart, motivated people that we're trying to work with and give them space at the table to get the best outcome for their community. But the results are thin on the ground at the moment. There are a few really good little projects where that's been super successful, and I'd commend the Institute of Landscape Architects award pages. They've got some really good project summaries and snapshots of the amazing community first outcomes that have happened for those projects. And yeah, I guess our effort in the last couple of years was to set up that conference and raise as much awareness as possible for what the potential is, which is huge. Because when you think about it, cultural tourism is massive. Everyone does it. So when you go somewhere, I'm sending snaps to friends about the incredible, you know, Bologna's arcades, or, you know, it's something else you've seen which is very different and challenging to your own home position. We have those moments in all of our cities and all of our places. If we can just harness that energy to tell the story really well, it's actually got incredible economic outputs as well, particularly in Brisbane with the Olympic Games coming up in 2032.
We are out of time. So,
hello.
yes.
Thank you, Damian, for your presentation. I'm kind of related to your lecture because I used to live in Brisbane for years during my study. And I've been back and forth over the past 10 years, and I couldn't help but notice that it's been like, it has become an automobile-oriented lately because there are freeways, bridges. So I'm just wondering, because you try to connect pieces together, right? And I'm afraid that the city would become fragmented. How could you use the design to reconnect it? Because I try to link it back to Bangkok because we are so scattered as well, and we even lack of green spaces here. Thank you.
Yeah, it's tricky. We've got a little more access to land than you do here, particularly on the edge of the river. But a good example over the last few years is a job of ours called Kingsford Smith Drive. So it's the road from the city out to the airport. So, you know, like Singapore has those amazing avenues out to the airport. You want the visitors to come to our subtropical city in Brisbane and get a strong sense of connectivity and the majestic scale of the fig trees that live naturally in that part of the world. So we pitched the winning pitch that we were on board with for that road extension. And transport projects, you know, as we all know, can be fraught with danger because you're carving a bigger road through an urban area typically, and we are very, sensitive to that. In this instance, we convinced the client, so in a section, we have this much land for the road and nothing else. There's a cliff here and some houses, and I need 3 lanes and 3 lanes, and that's the brief. So we worked with the client in that instance to go, well, what if we shifted everything out a little bit and put a gap in the middle, shifted it out a little bit, and then cantilevered out a bit over the edge? Could we do that? And they went, oh, it's a bit daft to come back with, give me some more options. So we went, I thought a bit harder about it, and we thought, actually, no, we can do it because we've got a multidisciplinary team, architects, people. I've got one of our amazing landscape architects actually is an ex-concrete, an ex-site builder and works a lot with concrete. So we could actually work out technically how to cantilever in that particular muddy substrate, very similar to here, a big, fat, wide shared bike path. And in shifting the section across to do that, so we either had to have bikes over here under the cliff or somewhere else. We flipped them over, cantilevered because they don't need the same weight-bearing requirement as a car, so it can be thinner and cheaper. And then the gap in the middle, we've planted figs. So we've ticked the subtropical city outcome and shade and character and also the connectivity outcome. Now the downside was we can't, because it's cantilevered, you can't get figs out cantilever on the, well, they wouldn't let us do it over the river. So that edge is a bit hot, I'll be honest, and the budget for shade wasn't there. We should have gone harder. But there are shade stops and rest stops with water to join the dots, but eventually those figs will come right out over the top and create that big macro canopy that you see in places like Singapore. So that is an example of how we've tried to translate this thinking into physical outcomes and push the boundaries of where the ownership line is or not to create a really good public outcome. And it's going gangbusters now. It's a really popular, particularly with e-bikes and e-scooters, right? So you can walk, was it 4 or 5 Ks an hour? You triple that on a bike, and anything faster on an e-bike is just crazy dangerous. But so if you triple the speed between places, the city actually shrinks at the speed of bike, which is the point of that slide. I meant to say that before, so thanks for bringing it up. The city will shrink if we adapt new technologies to get around and just do it in a comfortable way. So that's one big stretch of the river edge that we've actually achieved a built outcome, which is now being used, and community wins, awesome. And then we're working on a number of other bridges that are more like join the dots, join a park to a park, which is also another big win for the city, with shade on them, so, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for coming. That was really inspiring talk. And yeah, I hope we can, some of the movers and shakers here can help make some of these things happen in Bangkok.
There's some very smart people here. You can make it work. Lock the doors. We'll keep them in here until we sort it out.